So did you have any questions about this next assignment where you're basically taking your image and creating an initial version and then 3 variations of it? Like I sent several examples. Any questions about the tools that you're using? Or about, let me do this. Or about anything that I've covered so far with some of these tools?
I kind of have problems with the reflect tool. I feel like, I don't know why, but it like sometimes bugs out when I try to like flip it to make it symmetrical, you know?
Okay, so let's say I want to flip this image, but I'll go back and make it half an image again. So what I'll do here is I'll just draw a rectangle out here, and I'll fill it with nothing. And then I'll use the shape builder tool to cut this so I have half again. So I select everything, I go into the shape builder tool here, and then the trick is option drag, and you can just get rid of stuff. So it's a really great tool to do something like this. So I'm back to just a half a face, right? So now I can go back and play with the symmetry. So you just have to make sure you have everything selected. And then the symmetry tool can be a little tricky if you don't click the right way. So it's underneath rotate, and you go into reflect. I call it the symmetry tool, but it's really the reflect tool. And you just click once, and then you kind of lift your finger up from the mouse, and then you hit option and shift, and then you just kind of rotate into position with the shift and the option key pressed down. Shift isn't really necessary, but what shift does is it rotates it in 45-degree increments. And if you don't have it shift click down, when you do that, it kind of, I'll just click again. You know, if you don't have shift hit your finger on shift, you have to kind of control it yourself. So shift is kind of nice because it puts your rotations at 45-degree increments. But the challenge is, like, I do this sometimes too with this tool, with the reflect tool. If I click down and then like I keep my finger on it, let's say, and what happens is this reflect pop-up window pops up. So you just have to click once. You can lift your finger off from the mouse key, and then hit option and shift and click back down again, and that's how it works.
Okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, I was like having weird problems where like sometimes one of the like lines like wouldn't like follow when I was like rotating it. It was probably like some weird thing that I was doing. I don't know. I guess I'll just investigate it. It was like it wouldn't like properly like copy the whole thing, you know? Like it would be missing a couple lines when I would flip it or something. I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes you have to just look in your layers. So it could be that you have something on a layer and you don't see what's on that layer and you're not fully selecting things. So sometimes it's a good idea too, like as you're doing stuff like this, if your artwork gets really complicated, hit Control Y if you're on a PC, Command Y if you're on a Mac, and that will just let you see just like the base vector lines for the artwork. And sometimes that helps because then you can see everything that's selected. It's a little bit more difficult when you're working in normal mode instead of outline mode to see if everything's selected. So those are yeah, it can be a little challenging, but once you get used to it, it shouldn't be too difficult. So any other questions about assignment 3? And just like the layout, I just want to make sure everybody knows, I want it set up like this. You have your original, and then I'll just grab these. And then you have your 3 variations down below. And this one got messed up here, but yeah, so then you have your variations just like this. Kind of the idea is, as you work on these variations, you'll just find ways to like think about the composition and kind of distill it and refine it and come up with something that is, you know, just kind of aesthetically pleasing as well as you can. It's sometimes about just thinking about the right lines where they should be placed and a sense of balance, trying to achieve a sense of balance. And we'll talk more about like design principles in the upcoming units. So there's different things to think about. So it's more, you know, this almost more about exploring these tools as well versus trying to get something that's absolutely perfect at this point. But you should always be thinking about like distilling things and trying to get to the essence of something so it has some sort of like symbolic resonance, you know, where it just feels right. It's like an intuitive process. So yeah, this is the final look for the assignment. So when you hand it in as a PDF, it should look like this layout, you know, 1 on top and the 3 variations down below. So is there any other questions how I came up with some of these designs? Because the only one that I didn't really talk about was like this viney type kind of thing that I was doing. And with this one, I want to talk about a couple things, a couple new things. So with that viney structure, I kind of like playing with viney kind of things that kind of grow and kind of twist and turn. So for that one, I use the brush tool. And the brush tool, when you draw it out, you get this kind of like thicker path that you can kind of control with your bracket keys in your keyboard. So let's see something real quick. Here, I'm going to bring this up. I got this little keyboard viewer here so you can see what keys I'm pressing. Oh, but it doesn't show the bracket keys. So anyways, so you can press your, it's next to the P key on the keyboard, the square brackets. And this is how the brush works in Photoshop too, where you can make it bigger or smaller. So left bracket makes it bigger, right bracket makes it smaller. And then you can, what I was doing was I was like creating these like growths that come out of something, you know, just kind of like a viney like growth. But the other thing you can do with this tool, this brush tool, is you select your strokes, and then up in the control bar, if you have that control bar set going across, you have these 2 different pull down menus that's next to the stroke size. And this one menu that says 5 round, you can pull this down and you can change the type of brush here. So you can change the stroke and the stroke angle. So basically it's these 4 on top that you can kind of play with the stroke angle. And then if you get something that you kind of like, you can adjust it. But what you can do after this to get it so you can create outlines out of it, and I use this all the time, and we'll start to use this when we get into typography too, is you select your paths and then you go to Object, Path, and you go to, there's actually 2 ways to do it. You can go to Object, expand appearance. And what that does is it turns your paths into shapes. So now when I go into my fill, I can fill it with white, and then I can outline it with black. So now I have this. And then the next thing you can do is you can either select all the pieces and go into Pathfinder, which is right here, and hit Unite. And now it's like one kind of complex, viney-like shape that you can play with. So the other way to do it, if I go back to what it was originally, not as shapes, but as strokes. And you can see the difference when you hit Command or Control Y. You know, there it's set as strokes. If I go into Path and I go into Outline Stroke, it does the same thing basically. So now when I hit Command or Control Y, you have shapes. So it's basically turning a stroke into a shape. And if you have a thick stroke, it's going to turn it into a wider shape, and then you can connect them together. So that's kind of like a little trick that I did with that. As we talk about typography, so I'm going to get into typography next week with the next unit. We'll have an assignment where you're going to take a historical figure or a historical piece of architecture, and you're going to create a version of it composed out of type. And you're going to think about what that piece of architecture or that person, who that person was in history, and try to find fonts that correlate with who that person was. So, you know, for example, if you picked like somebody who was like a poet, maybe you want a lot of script-based fonts. But the next unit goes through different types of fonts and the history behind them, and the different types of moods you can convey with different fonts, and how you can align that with an image of a person or a building to have that the meaning of that person or building be conveyed through the type of font being used. But for using fonts, we'll be using that outline feature, which is the same thing that I did with the path, but I'll pick a font here. So I'll go here, I'll pick Bungee, for example. So we'll be doing this a lot with fonts. Is you can do the same thing with the font that you did with the path. When you have the font, it's basically set on a baseline. So the line that the font, this red line here, you can kind of see it, that's called the baseline. And right now, the font itself, you don't have the ability to actually click on various points on the font and manipulate the font. What you have to do to actually manipulate that font and maybe combine characters together in different ways is to convert the font to outline, just like I did with the path. So if you go into type, there's a create outlines, and you do that. And now if I use my direct selection tool, which is the white arrow, it's A on the keyboard, I can select the individual letter forms. You know, then I can also scale them and start to do different things with these letter forms. If you hit V for your normal selection tool, it's going to select them all together, because it's still, Illustrator still sees it as a group of text, since it was typed out as one line of text from the very beginning. So if you want to select individual parts, you have to use your direct selection tool. So the next assignment will have you be doing things like this, where you're manipulating the font, changing the position, and then even using your Pathfinder tools to do other things, such as taking that eye or, you know, a compound path would be good too. To take the character I and knock that out of another character, or combining the characters in different ways. So maybe going into Pathfinder tool and using Unite. Oops. And then you could use the shape builder tool as well to play with this. If you want to totally break apart the text, so even if you use the selection tool, right now they're all kind of combined together, but if you want each individual component, each individual letter to be independent, what you can do is you go to Object, and you can usually go to Expand, and that should do it. Sometimes you have to do it a couple times, and sometimes you have to do it in combination with Ungroup. And then once I do an Ungroup, it's starting to break up the text. So when I use the regular selection tool, they're individual pieces. You might have to ungroup it more than once too. So now it's totally ungrouped. And here too, you could probably start to play with the shape builder tool. So if I select all of these pieces and I go into the shape builder tool, I can start to maybe cut out sections or combine sections in different ways. And so outlining paths is going to become an important thing that you're going to use. Outlining paths, outlining fonts to manipulate them to create other things from them. Somebody had the question about color, and we're still not getting into color yet. But sometimes when I'm working in black and white, I will still use color and use it as a way to help identify things. So when I'm moving things around, I can clearly differentiate things with color, and then I convert it to black and white. So there's a nice little trick for that. And we'll talk more about this when we get into color, but I want to show you this. So if you want to get like a grayscale range and you don't want to select individual parts and individually use your swatches, one thing you can do is go into color guide here. So you have this color guide, and in color guide, there's a little color wheel, and you click up on that, and you have a couple things here. So you have these bright colors here, and you have a grayscale group. And one of the things you can do, I'm going to cancel out of that first, is go into this and start assigning things with different colors. So you can just click on a letter, let's say, and give it a color here, you know, just give it random colors. So I'll just give it a bunch of random colors. And then after you've done that, go into that color wheel and then click on the grays, and you just hit that grays button and convert your colored artwork to grayscale. So you can play with the grayscale. And I think you can do things where you can randomize. So if I click on these little swatches down below, there's like 3 little icons. I can randomize the color, play with different variations, and then click on grayscale again, and just kind of explore these grayscale variations. So it's kind of fun to kind of work in color, but then you convert it to grayscale when you're done. And oops. me go back. Here. Or you can also go into let's see. Actually, I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to go back up in here and just cancel out of this. I'm going to select these characters again, go back into the color wheel, and just hit grayscale. And let's see, for some reason it's not doing it any. Let me just go. For some reason, it's not letting me do it. Well, it was working. I don't know what I did, but I did have it going there. But another thing you can do actually is under the shape builder tool is this live paint bucket tool. So if you click on that and you start to pick different colors, what's cool about using this live paint bucket tool is once you use the shape builder tool, it will let you actually change the color of intersections, and anything that you hover over, it's going to let you change that color. So this is another way to quickly color something. And let me go back in here. And let me go back and try to select this again, see if I can get it back into grayscale. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know why it's not doing it anymore. Anyways, there's a couple of tools there just to change the color real quickly. And I thought there was something else when it comes to color where, let's see, if I select everything here, let's see, and I go to color to bring up my color swatches, and I change the grayscale here, then you can use the grayscale ramp to change the grayscale colors here. And you also have your swatches too. So you can go into swatches, and there's a grayscale ramp in swatches as well. But I kind of like using this live paint tool because it's just really fast. It's just a fast way to do it. So I don't know if you've used this before, but I think it's a really great tool. So fonts, it's going to be the focus of our next unit. And the other part of it is bringing an image in and combining it with fonts. So I want you to pick like a historical figure or a piece of architecture. So give me like a historical figure to work with. Somebody pick something, and that's the person I'll use for this demonstration. If you could throw out some names of historical figures. Anybody? Like give me a suggestion on a historical figure. Like anybody through history. Somebody famous.
David Bowie.
All right, so I would do a search for David Bowie, and so let's see. So I have a bunch of David Bowies to choose from. Oops. So let's say I'll pick one. So I'll pick this David Bowie. So I'm just going to copy the image from that image search here. And then paste it right into Illustrator. So I have David Bowie here. And let me just clean up some stuff. So for this next assignment, we'll be using something called image trace. So whenever you bring in pixels into Illustrator and you have the control bar available on top, and also it's available in your properties menu as well. But that's why I like using the control bar, because it's a little easier to see and it gives you more options than properties. So if you don't have your control bar, you go to Windows and you just click on Control. But whenever you bring in a pixel-based image, it's going to give you an option to image trace. And so you have an image trace button right here. So you click on that and you'll get instant vectors. It may not be what you want. So you have presets here that you can explore. So you have like a shades of gray preset. But for this assignment, I really want you to stick with this default. And then the other thing you can do though to adjust this is you click on this icon next to default, and it lets you change like the levels of black and white. So if you drag this in different ways, you can start to get a better image out of it depending on how far you drag it. So it's basically looking at the image and it's changing the image to like a black and white image, and it's changing the concentration of black and white on that image. And then you can even kind of push it further. You go into advanced and you can kind of adjust it even further. And so once you get something that you like, so this is where you do it though. You click on this little icon here next to preset and you can adjust it. And then once you get something that you like, you hit expand. You have to hit expand because right now you can't really change anything in the image. It's like this solid piece of artwork. Once you hit expand, you can go in here with your direct selection tool and start to play with the image a little bit. So for this, like if I want to get rid of the background that's black, and the way that this tool works, everything is connected. So if I like shift that around, it's really gonna change things. Or if I delete it, you know, I lose a lot. So what you can do though, if you want to get like an outline around him, you can use this eraser tool. So here is the eraser tool. Shift E is the shortcut. And the eraser tool kind of works like the brush tool, where if you click on your square bracket keys, you can make it bigger or smaller. And then you can kind of carve into it. So you just get like an outline. So you just kind of carving into that. And then once you do, you know, I'm just kind of cleaning it up. And then the idea is to start to think about different fonts that would work to describe this person in history. So if this was Bowie, from the late 60s, early 70s, you would start to think about fonts from the late 60s and early 70s and do some research. And how do you bring those fonts into Illustrator is going to be the challenge. So if you go to type, you go to more from Adobe Fonts. And what I'll have to ask is anybody who's using the Illustrator software from PCC, where you're going into the web to use the Creative Suite, we'll have to make sure that this works. I think it should, but if you go to type, more fonts from Adobe, if you already have the Creative Cloud, maybe you've already done this. You go into, you're in Typekit, and now you can start to pick different fonts. Now, if you're, we'll kind of go through like the history of fonts, but funky, it's probably a little bit more from the 60s. Some of the more kind of psychedelic looking fonts. Well, let's say I want to use, I'll just pick this Ono Blaze. So you just click on that font and you activate it. And then once you activate that font, it usually takes like a couple minutes, but it should appear here in your font library. And usually the fonts from Typekit are going to have a little cloud icon. So let's see if it's here. And sometimes it takes a while for these fonts to show up. So here it is, Ono Blaze. So there it is. So we'll go through like font history and different eras for different types of fonts. I have some different resources that I'll put inside of Canvas. So we'll play with this in different ways. But for the assignment, I'm going to have you combine the font and the image together in different ways. And you can outline the font. The other thing you can do is you can select part of the artwork. And basically this is selecting all of it because it's one piece. So maybe I want to cut some pieces apart. So I can go and use that eraser tool again. And create different sections here. So I'm just going to kind of cut through pieces. And it looks like, so like cut through that piece. And then now if I select a piece, I can tell that it's not connected with everything else. Sometimes, I'll just put a color in there. Maybe I want to, so I'm just using the erase tool to get rid of some of those vectors. So now I have this section. So another thing you can do is you can fill an area with type. So if you go to your toolbar, go to your type tool and click on this area type tool and just click on a section. Sometimes you have to click on an edge. One thing that might happen is you get this error about non-compound path. So what you do there is if it comes up, that non-compound path error, you go to Object, Compound Paths, and Release. Let's see. And now it works. So with this, for the fonts, there's a couple keyboard shortcuts that are going to be good to know. And one is Shift Command or Shift Control, and it's your comma and period key to make the font smaller, you hit Shift, Command, comma if you're on a Mac, Shift, Control, comma on a PC. And if you want to make it bigger, you hit Shift, Command, period, or Shift, Control, period if you're on a PC. And so you can fill sections with type. So if you, let's see, and if you go to type and fill with placeholder text here, it will fill the whole thing up instantly. So if I make the font really small and then go to type and fill with placeholder text, it starts to fill up these areas. I would kind of want you to take words that relate to the image. So maybe it's like lyrics from a David Bowie song goes into that section. But you can kind of do that throughout, with these different pieces, go to different sections, select them, use your type tool. You probably do have to go to compound path and hit release first. And then just use that tool. Use the fill with type tool here and go to type and then fill with placeholder text. So you can start to recreate that image with type. So that's the idea for that assignment. So I'll have more information though next week. I'm just kind of giving you a preview of a couple different tools that I want you to use. Image tracing, converting type to outlines, but I'll get into more details. But is there any questions about some of these techniques that I'm doing here, creating? So yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to show you tonight. Just a couple more things we can do with
will this one be just black and white or grayscale? Is grayscale good for this too, or no?
Yeah, you can do grayscale for this one as well. I think sometimes it's better to have it black and white. It depends. It depends on what you want to do. And you don't have to fill it all with type, and you can kind of do a combination of type and vectors. Sometimes black and white just is more powerful when it's just black and white like that. In graphic design too, when you have text, there's this implied grayness to the text when it is grouped together in a certain way. So you have your leading is the spacing between lines of text. That's what your leading is. When you have more leading between lines of text, it conveys like a lighter color, a lighter density of text. So it can read as like a lighter or darker. But yeah, you can, yeah, if you want to use grayscales for this one, that's fine. I'm trying to stay away from color until we get more into color in a couple weeks when we start to focus more on color.
Thanks.
Yep. So any other questions? So there's a lot of different techniques to play with for this assignment. Another one real quick is just type on a path. So with the pen tool, if I drag out some paths here and go into my type tool, and if you just hover over any path while you're in the type tool, the type tool icon changes. So it becomes a cursor with a wavy line through it, and then you click on that text, and then you can put text on that curve. So something to explore in this assignment too is text on a path. So you just got to click on the type tool, click on the text, and then you got this flowing text. So things to think about too are scale with this. So if you have a lot of small bunched up text, you know, think about playing with contrast and scale. So, you know, maybe you have some very large letter forms too that work with this in some way. And a good shortcut to remember is convert to outlines. So Shift Command O is the keyboard shortcut for convert to outlines, because sometimes you use that a lot. And here too, if I grab all of this and go to my, say, shape builder tool, here I think grayscale would kind of be nice to use if you use this live paint tool. And it's giving me that compound error path again, so you might have to go to compound path and hit release. It doesn't like it. So sometimes too, what you might have to do, if you do find that things are not working, go to object and hit expand, and just expand everything. And then go back into the shape builder tool here. And I think now too, when you work with text like this and you start to outline lots of text, it really starts to bog down the computer because you have so many vector points to work with. So it might be slow if you have a lot of text that you're playing with. It might even like crash on you if you're getting too crazy. Let's see if it does it. But yeah, just play with like scale, fill things with text, explore like extremes. You got rid of too much. Now it's but you'll find like all of these interesting things happen when you really start to experiment and combine things in different ways, and just kind of be very loose with the process. The less you strive for perfection, I think the more interesting things will happen, that you'll be surprised to see these combinations of things that you didn't even think about. So let it do its thing. Okay. Yeah, and I wanted to go back into the live paint tool and fill some of this with some gray. I think that would be interesting. But there's a lot in this. All that small text is really making it go slow. Another thing that you should do too, if it is going slow like this, is in your layers, start to think about separating things layer by layer to make the workflow easier. So if I go into my layers, and I think the type here, for example, is like really bogging it down. So I'll use my direct selection tool and grab that type and do a Command X, Command Cut, or Control X on a PC. Cut that type that was outlined because it has a lot of points in it now on those vectors. Create a new layer and then select that layer and hit Command F or Control F, and that is paste in front. And then for the stuff that's really busy and you have a lot of detail there, hide it. I'm going to hide it. And oops, maybe it didn't do it in the right layer. Yeah, it went back into. Sometimes you have to lock the layers too, and then select the layer you want. There you go. Hide it, and then go back and use the tools that you need to use to make this work a little faster. Yeah, and all this text here now too is also converted to outlines as well. So that's another reason why it's gonna maybe go slow. So it's getting really detailed. So when you have a lot of text, just think about using additional layers to organize things. That really kind of screwed it up. So anyways, that's kind of what I wanted to show you tonight. Those additional techniques. I'll take this video and I will post it, and I will also put it inside the next unit. So you can see some of this again as you work through this. But it's a lot of this is pretty straightforward. I think you have some good experience now with the pen tools. So now it's going to be more about focusing on organizing your art, keeping things on different layers and just like workflow and process, so that you can do what you want without the computer like totally slowing down on you when you get into areas of like very high detail. So yeah, so that's pretty much all I was going to talk about. Is there any other questions or anything? Thoughts, concerns?
No, thanks.
So, all right. So yeah, yeah, that's it for tonight. If you have any other, as you're working through assignment 3, and you have any other questions about some of those tools, just send me a message on Discord, and I usually answer right away. And yeah, that's all I got to have for you tonight. So have a good night, and most likely we'll have the next Zoom on next Thursday, and on Tuesday I will reveal the next unit, which is going to focus on typography and this assignment where you're combining type and image together. So
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Have a good night.